Most people that lie about money, pretending they have more than they actually do, a nicer car than they actually have, a bigger bonus than they actually got, a better investment return than they actually had. Derek did something different. He invented an entire lifestyle around a made-up financial existence, and for almost 5 years, none of us noticed. The strange part is that I liked him. When my daughter Claire first brought Derek home, I expected the usual awkward dinner. Instead, he fit in immediately. He was funny without trying too hard. He asked questions. He helped clear the table. And most importantly, Claire seemed happy. That mattered more to me than anything else. Derek worked as an independent business consultant. At least, that was how he described it. He never bragged, but the subject of money came up often enough that we developed a picture of him. He had done well with GameStop, very well. At one dinner, he casually mentioned turning about $20,000 into more than $150,000. Later came a windfall in cryptocurrency. Then an inheritance from his grandfather. Then a profitable real estate investment. Then another investment property he was supposedly renovating with a partner. None of it sounded impossible. He never claimed to own a private jet. He never showed up wearing a $100,000 watch. He just seemed like a young guy who had made some smart and lucrative decisions, and he spent money like someone who could afford to. Nice restaurants, weekend trips, concert tickets, a new SUV. When he proposed to Claire, I was happy for them. By then they'd been together almost 5 years. The wedding planning started immediately. Claire wanted a beautiful venue outside the city. It wasn't cheap. Derek didn't hesitate. He told us he would cover a large portion himself. I remember telling him he didn't need to prove anything to us. He laughed. "I'm good." I believed him. A few months later, the venue needed a deposit. $12,000. Derek called me. His money was temporarily tied up in a real estate deal. Could I cover his portion for a few weeks? He would pay me back as soon as the property closed. I said yes. $12,000 is a lot of money for me, but I wasn't worried about losing it. This was my future son-in-law. What bothered me was something else, the new investment property. Derek told me the money was tied up in a house on Benton Road. That name sounded familiar. A year earlier, he had shown me pictures of what I was almost certain was the same house. Back then, he'd said the renovation was finished. He even joked that the tenant had already called twice about the water heater. Maybe I was remembering it wrong, so I searched the address. Finding the county property records took less than 2 minutes. Derek didn't own the house. He never had. The property belonged to a woman who had owned it for almost 15 years. I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit. Then I searched the second property I remembered him mentioning. Same result. Different owner. No Derek. No company connected to Derek. Nothing. That was the moment I should have called Claire. Instead, I kept looking. I told myself to be sure I was right before talking to Claire and possibly blowing up my daughter's wedding. The consulting company existed. Technically. Derek had registered an LLC 3 years earlier, but I could find almost no sign of an operating business. No employees, no meaningful web presence, no office. Nothing that resembled the company I'd spent years imagining when he said he was meeting clients or closing contracts. Then I started remembering smaller things. He'd once told us his grandfather left him around $500,000. I called someone in the family I knew well enough to ask carefully. There had been an inheritance. It was closer to $30,000. The GameStop story was harder to verify, and so was the crypto. But suddenly I wasn't asking whether Derek had exaggerated one thing. I was asking whether anything he had told us about money was true. I checked the SUV. Financed. Almost nothing down. I checked public records for the properties. Nothing. I checked the business. Almost nothing. Then I thought about the $12,000 wedding payment sitting on my credit card. And I finally called Claire. I didn't tell her what I'd found. I asked one question. How much money do you think Derek has? She laughed. What kind of question is that? I don't know, roughly. She thought for a moment. Maybe 500,000? More, probably. That answer scared me more than anything I'd found online. Because until then, I'd wondered whether Derek had simply been trying to impress me. He hadn't. Claire believed the same story. I drove to her apartment. I brought printouts, property records, business filings, everything I had. Claire went through the same stages I had. Confusion first, then explanations. Maybe the properties were in someone else's name. Maybe the company operated under another name. Maybe the inheritance had been put into a trust. Maybe I had misunderstood what Derek meant. Then she called him. Derek came home about 40 minutes later. He saw the papers on the table, and before either of us asked anything, his face changed. Not anger, not confusion, recognition. Claire asked him about Benton Road. He sat down. She asked about the inheritance. He looked at the floor. Then she asked the question that ended every excuse. How much money do you actually have? Derek was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Not much. The $500,000 inheritance didn't exist. The investment properties weren't his. The consulting company brought in some money, but nowhere near what he'd implied. The investment account was almost empty. The credit cards weren't. He was carrying more than $60,000 in consumer debt. Claire started crying. I didn't. I was too busy trying to understand why. Derek gave us an answer that was almost more disturbing than the numbers. He said the first lie happened early in their relationship. He'd made a small profit on GameStop, a few $1,000s. Claire was impressed, so he made it bigger. Then he told a friend the same story. Then her family heard it. And once people started treating him like the successful investor he'd pretended to be, he didn't know how to admit he wasn't that person. So the next success story supported the first one. Then another supported that. The inheritance explained the spending. The rental properties explained the wealth. The consulting business explained everything else. At some point, Derek wasn't lying about money anymore. He was maintaining a character. Claire asked him something I still think about. When were you going to tell me? Derek didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I thought I'd catch up. That was it. He thought eventually the real Derek would become successful enough to meet the fictional Derek he'd already created. But the wedding arrived first. Claire postponed it 2 days later. Not canceled, postponed. That surprised some people. It didn't surprise me. It wasn't my marriage. I told Claire I would support whatever decision she made, but only after she knew exactly what she was deciding. Derek had to show her everything. Accounts, debts, income, credit cards, taxes, every number, no more stories. I got my $12,000 back eventually. That wasn't the part that mattered. Plenty of good people are broke. Plenty of good people have debt. And being bad with money doesn't make someone a bad partner, but Claire hadn't agreed to marry a man who was struggling financially. She had agreed to marry a man she believed owned property, had substantial investments, and possessed the kind of financial security they'd talked about building their future around. That man didn't exist. I still don't know whether she'll marry Derek. That's her decision, but I know what bothered me about that phone call now. It wasn't that he needed $12,000. It was that for the first time, reality had asked Derek to produce the life he'd been describing for years. And he couldn't. The money wasn't the biggest lie. My daughter's future was.